In 1891, one of the most powerful empires on earth was defeated by people who simply stopped smoking. No bullets, no armies, no bloody revolution. Just millions of Iranians putting down their pipes and walking away from a plant they had enjoyed for centuries. The British Empire had conquered nations with gunboats and Gatling guns. They had carved up continents and extracted wealth from lands their soldiers had never seen. But in Persia, they discovered something their military strategists had never planned for. You can force a people to submit. You cannot force them to consume. Most people think the tobacco protest was about cigarettes, a religious ruling, a moment of national pride. School textbooks reduce it to a paragraph. A fatwa was issued. The Shah backed down. The British left. That version is a lie by omission. The tobacco protest was the first successful mass economic resistance against colonial extraction in modern Middle Eastern history. It created the blueprint. It forged the alliance between clergy and merchants that would topple the Qajar dynasty 15 years later. It established patterns of economic nationalism that echo through Iranian politics to this very day. When modern Iran speaks of the resistance economy against American sanctions, they are reading from a playbook written in 1891. Oil did not teach Iran to resist Western economic control. Tobacco did. The Shah who signed away his nation's tobacco was the same Shah who had already sold the roads, the rivers, the minerals, and the banking system to foreign powers. He was running an empire like a pawn shop, hawking pieces of sovereignty for short-term cash. The British did not stumble into this arrangement. They engineered it. For decades, London had studied the pressure points of the Qajar economy. They mapped the bottlenecks. They identified the gatekeepers. They understood that controlling trade meant controlling the state. The tobacco concession was never about tobacco. It was about building infrastructure for total economic extraction. The pipes and cigarettes were simply the delivery mechanism for a deeper form of control. Welcome to Noob Historian. We follow the money, trace the power, and expose the history they'd never taught you in school. This matters to you because the playbook used against Iran in 1891 is the same playbook used against dozens of nations today. Economic concessions, structural dependency, debt leverage. The tools have evolved. The strategy remains identical. When you understand how Iran learned to fight back, you understand why economic sovereignty remains the central battleground of the modern world. You understand why sanctions dominate headlines. You understand why the relationship between religious authority and economic policy looks different in Tehran than in any Western capital. The tobacco war was not a quirky historical footnote. It was a trial run for the 20th century. Nasir al-Din Shah needed money. He always needed money. By 1890, the Qajar state was a magnificent contradiction. On paper, the Shah controlled a vast territory stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. In practice, he controlled very little. Provincial governors operated as semi-independent rulers. Tax collection was erratic and corrupt. The military was outdated and poorly supplied. The treasury was perpetually empty. The Shah had expensive tastes. 3 trips to Europe had shown him what modern monarchs enjoyed: palaces, technology, prestige. He wanted Persia to glitter like Paris. But Persia was not France. It did not have an industrial economy generating tax revenue. It did not have colonies to extract wealth from. It was, in the brutal calculus of the era, a target rather than a hunter. The British and Russian empires had spent decades circling Persian territory. The Great Game placed Persia directly between Russian ambitions pushing south and British determination to protect India. Neither power wanted to absorb Persia directly. Both wanted to control it indirectly. Economic concessions became the weapon of choice. The pattern was elegant and devastating. A European businessman would approach the Shah with a proposal. Give us exclusive rights to develop a resource or industry. We will pay you up front and share the profits. You modernize without spending. We handle the details. The Shah saw easy money. The Europeans saw a mechanism for structural control. By 1890, the concession economy had already stripped away significant portions of Iranian sovereignty. The Reuter Concession of 1872 had attempted to grant a single British subject control over nearly all Persian economic development. That deal was so extreme that even the British government found it embarrassing. It collapsed under Russian pressure, but the template survived. British interests controlled the Imperial Bank of Persia, established in 1889. This gave London direct influence over Persian currency and credit. British capital dominated the telegraph system. British merchants held privileged positions in Persian ports. Each concession removed another lever of economic control from Iranian hands. Each concession made the next concession easier to extract. The Shah's court was not blind to this dynamic. Some advisors warned that selling economic rights would eventually mean selling political independence. But the court faced an impossible calculation. Modernization required capital. Capital required either taxation of a poor population or foreign investment. Foreign investment required concessions. Concessions required surrendering control. There was no path to modernity that did not run through European banks. Major Gerald Talbot understood this trap perfectly. He He was a British military officer with extensive contacts in London financial circles. He had watched other concession hunters operate in Persia. He knew what the Shah wanted to hear. Talbot proposed a tobacco concession in early 1890. The terms were straightforward on the surface. The British company would receive a 50-year monopoly over the production, sale, and export of all tobacco in Persia. In exchange, the Shah would receive £15,000 annually plus 25% of net profits. The Shah's advisors examined the numbers. Tobacco was a significant crop. Millions of Persians smoked. The trade employed thousands of farmers, merchants, and shopkeepers. A well-run monopoly could generate substantial revenue. The advisors did not see the trap within the terms. Talbot's concession did not merely cover tobacco sales. It granted complete control over cultivation itself. Persian farmers would be forced to sell their entire tobacco harvest to the British company at prices the company determined. Persian merchants who had traded tobacco for generations would be shut out entirely. Persian shopkeepers would become employees of a foreign corporation. The concession converted an entire sector of the Iranian economy into a colonial extraction apparatus. More significantly, the concession created infrastructure, warehouses, transportation networks, distribution chains, a system of local agents embedded in every town where tobacco was grown or sold. This infrastructure could be adapted. Once you control the mechanisms for moving one product through a society, you understand how to control others. Talbot knew exactly what he was building. His investors in London knew exactly what they were funding. The Shah saw £15,000 per year. The British saw a template for economic colonization. Nasir al-Din Shah signed the concession on March 8, 1890. He had just sold his country's first major industry to a foreign power for less than the cost of one of his European vacations. The tobacco concession was signed in secret. For months, most Persians knew nothing of the agreement that would reshape their economic lives. Word began to spread in early 1891. Merchants in the bazaars heard rumors from contacts in the capital. Tobacco traders learned that foreign agents were asking questions about their businesses. Farmers discovered that European representatives were surveying their fields, and the full terms of the concession leaked by spring. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Persian tobacco merchants had operated their trade for centuries. Family businesses passed through generations. Complex networks of credit and trust linked farmers to urban sellers. The bazaar economy ran on relationships that no contract could capture. The British concession proposed to erase all of this overnight. Under the Régis system the company planned to implement, Persian merchants would have no role. They could not buy tobacco from farmers. They could not sell tobacco in their shops. They would be locked out of a trade their families had built over lifetimes. The merchants did not see a business regulation. They saw extinction. Their response drew on deep traditions of bazaar solidarity. Persian merchant guilds had survived centuries of political upheaval by developing sophisticated methods of collective action. When the state threatened commerce, the bazaars knew how to push back. Letters began circulating between major trading cities: Isfahan, Tabriz, Shiraz, Mashhad. Merchant networks that normally competed for advantage suddenly coordinated strategy. The first protests emerged in Shiraz during spring 1891. Tobacco traders closed their shops. They gathered in mosques to discuss resistance. They sent petitions to the provincial governor demanding the concession be cancelled. The governor forwarded the petitions to Tehran. The Shah's court dismissed them as merchant self-interest. The concession stood. But the Shiraz protests revealed something the court had not anticipated. The bazaar anger was not limited to tobacco merchants. The entire commercial class saw the concession as a precedent. If the Shah could sell tobacco to the British, he could sell anything: textiles, carpets, metalwork. Every merchant in every trade understood that their business could be next on the auction block. The tobacco concession unified the bazaar in a way that no previous royal policy had managed. This unity had political weight. The Qajar state depended on merchant credit. When the treasury ran short, the Shah borrowed from bazaar financiers. When the court needed imports, merchant networks delivered them. The economic infrastructure of Persia ran through the bazaars. An angry merchant class could not be ignored. But the Shah had already signed the contract. British investors had already committed capital. Walking back, the concession would humiliate the crown and anger a powerful foreign ally. The court chose to press forward. Régis agents began arriving in Persian cities during summer 1891. They established offices. They registered tobacco stocks. They informed local merchants that their trading licenses were now worthless. The agents met resistance immediately. In some cities, merchants refused to register their tobacco. In others, shop owners hid their inventory. A shadow economy began forming, with tobacco moving through unofficial channels. The Régis company reported these difficulties to London. Their investors grew concerned. The Persian market was supposed to be pacified and profitable. Instead, it was hostile and expensive to operate. But the company believed the resistance would fade. Merchants would grumble, then comply. Economic self-interest would overcome political anger. Persian consumers wanted their tobacco. Someone would sell it to them. The company was calculating without understanding the other power center in Persian society. The merchants were angry, but the clergy had not yet spoken. That silence was about to end. Ayatollah Mirza Hassan Shirazi was the most respected Shia cleric alive. From his base in Samarra, in Ottoman Iraq, he led a network of religious scholars that stretched across the Shia world. His legal opinions carried weight from Beirut to Bombay. When Shirazi spoke, millions listened. He had spent decades building this authority through scholarship, piety. He focused on religious education and community welfare. The tobacco crisis forced him out of neutrality. Throughout 1891, letters poured into Samarra from Persia. Merchants described their desperate situation. Religious scholars in Tehran and Isfahan reported growing unrest. Ordinary believers asked whether they should comply with an economic arrangement that enriched foreign Christians at Muslim expense. Shirazi understood the question beneath the questions. This was not really about tobacco. This was about whether religious authority would stand against royal policy when the two conflicted. The Qajar Shahs claimed authority over political and economic matters. The clergy claimed authority over religious and moral matters. For decades, these spheres had coexisted through deliberate ambiguity. Each side avoided forcing a direct confrontation. The tobacco concession eliminated the buffer zone. Economic life was moral life. When the Shah sold Persian livelihoods to foreign extraction, he entered territory the clergy could not ignore. Shirazi consulted with scholars across the network. The legal arguments took shape through months of correspondence. By late 1891, consensus had formed. The Fatwa came in December 1891. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Today, the use of tobacco in any form is tantamount to war against the Imam of the age. May God hasten his return. The Imam of the age was the 12th Imam, the hidden spiritual leader whose return Shia Muslims awaited. Invoking his name placed tobacco use in the most serious possible religious category. This was not a recommendation. This was not a guideline. This was a prohibition carrying the full weight of Shia religious law. The fatwa spread through the clerical network with remarkable speed. Within days, it reached every major Persian city. Local clergy read it from pulpits. Handwritten copies circulated through bazaars and homes. The response was immediate and total. Iranians stopped smoking. Not gradually, not partially. They stopped completely, and they stopped together. The British legation in Tehran reported the transformation with disbelief. People who had smoked their entire lives put down their pipes and did not pick them up again. Tobacco shops stood empty. Water pipes gathered dust. Even the Shah's own harem joined the boycott. His wives refused to prepare the water pipes he enjoyed. When he demanded tobacco, servants claimed they could not find any. The religious framing of the boycott changed its character entirely. This was no longer a commercial dispute. This was an act of faith. Compliance demonstrated piety. Violation demonstrated impiety. Social pressure reinforced religious commitment. Neighbors watched neighbors. Communities monitored members. Anyone seen smoking faced ostracism and shame. The boycott became self-enforcing through the mechanisms of social observation. The Regie Company collapsed within weeks. Their tobacco sat in warehouses. Their shops had no customers. Their agents could not find a single Persian willing to buy their product. The entire business model depended on consumer demand that had simply vanished. Company officials wrote frantic reports to London. They had invested substantially in infrastructure and inventory. They faced total loss unless the situation changed immediately. British diplomats pressured the Shah to suppress the boycott, break the clerical networks they urged, arrest the religious leaders supporting the fatwa, force Persians to smoke at gunpoint if necessary. The Shah understood what the British did not. He could not arrest every mullah in Persia. He could not force millions of people to violate their religious conscience. He could not station soldiers in every home watching every pipe. The state had guns. The clergy had legitimacy. In this contest, legitimacy was winning. Nasir al-Din Shah faced a choice between his concession and his throne. The protests were spreading beyond tobacco. Crowds gathered in Tehran demanding the cancellation. Violence loomed if the boycott continued. In January 1892, the Shah capitulated. He canceled the tobacco concession. Persia would pay compensation to the British company for their losses. The amount was £500,000. Persia would borrow this money from the Imperial Bank of Persia, at interest. The bank was British-owned. Iran had won the battle. Britain found a way to profit from the defeat. The tobacco protests succeeded because two groups that rarely cooperated discovered they shared an enemy. The bazaar merchants had economic grievances. They faced financial destruction from foreign competition. Their concerns were practical, immediate, and material. The senior clergy had moral grievances. They saw foreign Christian powers exploiting a Muslim nation. Their concerns were spiritual, principled, and abstract. Neither group alone could have defeated the concession. Together, they proved unstoppable. The merchants provided organization. Their guild networks connected every commercial center in Persia. Their credit relationships created channels for moving money and information. Their social position gave them influence with urban populations who depended on bazaar trade. The clergy provided legitimacy. Their religious authority transformed commercial resistance into sacred duty. Their scholarly networks transmitted the fatwa faster than any government communication could travel. Their moral standing placed the boycott beyond political negotiation. This alliance was not natural. Merchants and clergy had different interests, different worldviews, and different social positions. Wealthy traders lived in material comfort. Pious scholars emphasized spiritual priorities. The groups often viewed each other with suspicion. The tobacco crisis forced them together, and once together, they discovered their combined power exceeded anything either had previously imagined. The Shah's court recognized this alliance as an existential threat. The Qajar state had maintained control by balancing social groups against each other. The clergy checked merchants. Merchants checked tribal leaders. Tribal leaders checked the army. No single coalition could challenge royal authority. The tobacco protest demonstrated that coalitions could form rapidly around shared grievances. If merchants and clergy could unite over tobacco, they could unite over other issues: tax policy, judicial administration, constitutional reform. The genie was out of the bottle. Court conservatives urged the Shah to destroy the alliance before it grew stronger, arrest the leading merchants, exile the supportive clergy, reassert royal authority through force. Nasir al-Din Shah chose a different path. He tried to buy off both groups separately. Merchant leaders received government contracts. Clerical institutions received increased funding. The Shah hoped that material benefits would dissolve the bonds that crisis had created. The strategy failed because the alliance was based on more than self-interest. The tobacco protest had created a shared political identity. Merchants and clergy had fought together and won together. That experience forged connections that patronage could not break. The alliance went dormant after 1892. It did not disappear. When constitutional reformers began organizing in the early 1900s, they found the merchant clergy network already in place. The same communication channels that spread the tobacco fatwa now spread political manifestos. The same bazaar meeting halls that coordinated the boycott now hosted revolutionary committees. The constitutional revolution of 1906 drew directly on tobacco protest tactics, mass economic pressure, clerical legitimation of political demands, bazaar organization providing operational infrastructure. The men who led that revolution had lived through 1891. They remembered what worked. The alliance structure survived the constitutional revolution. It survived the Pahlavi dynasty. It survived modernization and secularization campaigns. When Ayatollah Khomeini mobilized opposition to the Shah in 1979, he activated the same merchant clergy coalition that Ayatollah Shirazi had forged 90 years earlier. Different Shah, different crisis. Same alliance, same tactics, same result. This is not coincidence. This is institutional memory. The tobacco protest did not merely defeat one concession. It created a template for resistance that became embedded in Iranian political culture. That template specified who should lead, how they should organize, and what methods they should use. Understanding 1891 explains 1906. Understanding 1906 explains 1953. Understanding 1953 explains 1979. The chain is unbroken. When Western analysts express confusion about Iranian political dynamics, they often miss this history. They see the Islamic Republic as a strange deviation from modern political forms. They ask why religious authority mixes so thoroughly with economic and political power. The answer began with tobacco. The compensation payment for the tobacco concession created a debt that took decades to pay. £500,000 borrowed from the British-owned Imperial Bank of Persia. Interest accumulating year by year. A financial obligation that drained the treasury and forced further concessions to cover the shortfall. The British lost the battle and monetized the defeat. They transformed a political humiliation into a financial asset. The loan gave them continued leverage over Persian state finances. This pattern would repeat throughout the 20th century. Iran would resist foreign economic control. Iran would succeed in the immediate confrontation. Iran would then face financial consequences that preserved foreign influence in different forms. The lesson was clear. Political victories were not enough. Economic independence required complete separation from the systems of Western financial control. The constitutional revolution of 1906 attempted this separation. Reformers demanded parliamentary oversight of foreign concessions. They insisted that economic agreements require legislative approval. They tried to build institutional barriers against the extraction economy. The attempt partially succeeded. The Majlis did gain authority over concessions, but British and Russian interests remained embedded in Iranian finance and infrastructure. The oil concession of 1901 created dependencies that made the tobacco arrangement look minor by comparison. Oil complicated everything the tobacco protest had clarified. Tobacco was a domestic industry with domestic consumption. Rejecting foreign control meant returning to Persian traditions. Oil was an industrial resource, requiring foreign technology and foreign markets. Rejecting foreign control meant rejecting development itself. Iranian nationalists spent the 20th century struggling with this contradiction. Mohammad Mossadegh's oil nationalization in 1951 drew directly on tobacco protest memory. He believed mass mobilization and moral legitimacy could defeat imperial economic arrangements. He was right about the mobilization. He was wrong about the geopolitics. The British and Americans organized a coup in 1953 that restored the Shah to full power. The coup proved that the tobacco tactics had limits. Moral legitimacy could defeat a commercial concession. It could not defeat coordinated great power intervention. The clerical networks could boycott a product. They could not stop a CIA operation. But the memory of both the protest and the coup shaped what came next. The Islamic Revolution of 1979 synthesized the lessons of 1891 and 1953. From the tobacco protest, it took the merchant-clergy alliance and the tactics of mass economic resistance. From the coup, it took the determination to achieve complete separation from Western power structures. The Islamic Republic's founding ideology centers economic independence as a religious duty. Self-sufficiency is not merely good policy, it is a moral obligation rooted in the experience of colonial extraction. This is why Western sanctions against Iran produce paradoxical effects. The pressure confirms the worldview. The suffering validates the narrative. The restriction proves the necessity of the resistance economy. American policymakers often express frustration that sanctions do not produce the political results they expect. They assume economic pressure will force governments toward compliance. They are calculating without understanding the history. Iranians have been resisting foreign economic pressure since their great-great-grandparents put down their tobacco pipes in 1891. The resistance is not a policy choice. It is an identity marker. It is proof of national dignity. It is religious duty. The tobacco protest taught Iran that collective sacrifice could defeat foreign extraction. That lesson has been reinforced through every subsequent generation. It is taught in schools. It is preached in mosques. It is referenced in political speeches. You cannot sanction away a century of institutional memory. The tobacco protest also established patterns that extend beyond Iran. Gandhi's campaigns in India drew on similar tactics 2 decades later: mass non-cooperation, economic boycott, religious and moral framing of political demands. Some historians argue Gandhi developed his methods independently. Others note that news of the Persian tobacco boycott circulated through British imperial networks. Either way, the structural similarity is striking. A colonized population discovers that the imperial economy depends on their participation. They withdraw that participation collectively. The empire cannot force consumption. The empire cannot replace millions of workers and consumers. The empire faces a choice between retreat and ruinous escalation. This dynamic has replayed across the post-colonial world. It replays today in various forms of economic resistance and sanctions evasion. The tobacco merchants of 1891 did not know they were writing a playbook for the 20th century. They were trying to save their businesses and their dignity. They were responding to immediate threats with traditional tactics of collective action. But what they built proved larger than their intentions. They demonstrated that economic power could be contested through methods the powerful had not anticipated. They showed that consumer populations held leverage they rarely chose to exercise. They proved that putting down a pipe could be a revolutionary act. The Régis Company is forgotten. Major Gerald Talbot is a footnote. The specific financial terms of the concession interest only specialists. But the template survives. The alliance survives. The memory survives. Every time an Iranian leader speaks of resistance economy, they invoke ghosts from 1891. Every time sanctions fail to produce expected results, the tobacco merchants smile from their graves. Every time the relationship between Tehran and Washington defies Western analysis, the answer traces back to pipes and prayers and a people who simply refuse to smoke. History teaches those who remember, and Iran remembers everything. This has been Noob Historian. The official story is the first lie. The money trail is the first truth.